Hi guys, this is Miss May. I am going to be sharing with you a little bit about genetic disorders today. This will be our last lesson in our unit on genetics. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about genetics and have a better idea of what it is and what it's about. And some of the genetic disorders that I'm going to share with you today are a few things that Miss Short or I may have mentioned a few weeks back when we were in school and we were studying genetics. To begin with, there are three key concepts I want you to keep in mind as I am going through sharing this information with you. The first one I want you to think about is what are two major causes of genetic disorders in humans? So, what causes genetic disorders? The second concept is how do geneticists trace the inheritance of a trait? So, how does one person get it versus another person getting it? The third key concept I want you to think about is how are genetic disorders diagnosed and how are they treated? A few key terms you will need to know. Genetic disorder is one that we've talked a little bit about. Pedigree chart, we've just recently mentioned. And then the third one is karyotype. And karyotype is probably a new term for you. This picture that you see right here, this whole picture, is what we would call a karyotype. But we'll get to it a little bit more in detail as we move on through the lesson today. Okay, first of all, I want to talk with you about describing genetic disorders. Genetic disorder is an abnormal condition that a person inherits through their genes or through their chromosomes. Some genetic disorders are caused by mutations in the DNA of the genes. So something goes wrong in the DNA as it's forming. Other times, or some other times, you may have just changes in the overall structure of the DNA or in the number of chromosomes that you have. You may have one too many chromosomes in a certain pair, and that can cause a person to have a specific genetic condition. Okay, the first condition I want to share with you today is called cystic fibrosis. This is a condition that affects a person's lungs mainly. The body produces abnormally thick mucus in the lungs and the intestines. The thick mucus fills the lungs and it makes it hard to breathe, which I can imagine if I had water or fluid of any type in my lungs, it would be hard to breathe in and breathe out. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a recessive allele on one chromosome, and it's the result of a mutation in which three of the base pairs of like nitrogen bases end up getting removed from a DNA molecule. So to share with you a little bit more about it in detail, I have a 5-minute brain pop to share with you.
Give me a sec, Moby. My asthma is acting up. I'm not calling you coach. Dear Tim and Moby, I have cystic fibrosis, and kids always ask me what it is. Could you make a movie about it so I don't have to explain CF a million more times? Thanks, Savannah. I totally get where you're coming from. We'd be happy to help you out. Cystic fibrosis might sound pretty scary, but people with CF can do most things anyone else can. CF does cause respiratory problems. People get winded more easily and have trouble breathing sometimes. You might also notice that they cough, like a lot. At times, the coughing fits can be pretty bad, but cystic fibrosis is not at all contagious. Those respiratory problems come from thickening of mucus in the lungs. That's a sticky fluid our bodies make to protect and lubricate our organs. In our lungs, it captures unhealthy stuff like germs and bacteria. When we cough it up, out go those harmful microbes. Mucus is usually super slick and slippery. In people with cystic fibrosis, it's much thicker, almost like glue. The stickier mucus clogs airways and makes it difficult to breathe. It also traps a lot more germs, but it's way, way harder to expel. So lung infections from chest colds to pneumonia are more common. That's why classmates with cystic fibrosis are often out sick. The thicker mucus comes from a problem with a cell protein called CFTR. It's part of cell membranes throughout the body. CFTR controls the flow of water into and out of the cell. When CFTR is working properly, mucus around the cell is fluid and runny. But when the protein is missing or malfunctioning, water stays trapped inside the cells. As a result, mucus is starved of water and it becomes thick and sticky. Unfortunately, cystic fibrosis doesn't only affect the lungs. It also limits the function of the pancreas, an organ that helps you absorb nutrients. Normally, the pancreas releases digestive enzymes into the small intestine. The enzymes break food down into the nutrients our bodies need. In people with CF, thick mucus blocks the tubes that deliver the enzymes, so nutrients stay trapped inside the food. Yeah, kids with cystic fibrosis often struggle with malnutrition. They tend to be on the smaller side and have trouble gaining weight. Eating plenty of snacks can boost their energy levels. They also take enzyme pills to help them digest. For their lungs, they do daily treatments to keep the airways clear. Machines called nebulizers thin mucus out. They deliver medicine in mist form straight into the lungs. Special vibrating vests also break up the mucus. Anyway, loosening all that gummy mucus is good news for the lungs. Nebulizers and vests make it easier to hack it all out. That helps keep infections away and makes breathing a lot easier. Go nuts, Moby. Remember, cystic fibrosis isn't contagious. It's genetic. That means it's passed down from parents to kids. Actually, kids with CF rarely have parents with it too. More often, the parents are both carriers. That means they have one gene that's normal and one CF gene. You get one gene from each parent, and which one you get is random. You only need one normal copy to ensure your CFTR proteins work properly. So even if both parents are carriers, it's only a 1 in 4 chance that any child will have cystic fibrosis. Testing to see if you're a carrier is crazy expensive. There are more than 1,000 mutations that can cause CF. That's why we need all the help we can to find a cure. You can volunteer at organizations like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They organize events to raise money for treatment and research. In our lifetimes, we might just beat cystic. Settle down, Moby. You're gonna get a technical. Sorry, ref. I got this. Come on, guys. Let's see some hustle. Hustle.
Okay, some genetic disorders or genetic conditions are a lot like what we've talked about when we've talked about other genetic traits. You know, some of our genetic traits you can see, such as like eye color and you know, hair color, the shape of your face, the attached or detached earlobes, and then other traits that we have you can't see, such as maybe having a certain talent, an artistic talent, or having allergies, something like that. Well, when we talk about some of our genetic disorders, just like with CF, cystic fibrosis, a person could have it and you could look at them and you would never be able to tell it. Same thing with sickle cell disease. Um, Sickle cell disease is another genetic disorder. It affects our hemoglobin or a person's hemoglobin. And the hemoglobin is a substance that's in our blood, and it's a protein that's in the blood, and it's what's in charge of carrying the oxygen. So it's part of our red blood cells. When O2 or oxygen concentrations are low, then our blood cells will end up having a sickle shape. And this over here is what a sickle shaped blood cell would look like. That's a normal red blood cell. This is a sickle shaped blood cell. It says the sickle shape can clog blood vessels and cause them to not carry as much O2 as normal shaped red blood cells. So instead of them flattening out and moving through our blood vessels, sometimes the pointed edges can get lodged and it sort of forms like a blood clot, and that can be harmful to a person. A person with one sickle-shaped allele will not have the disease, but a person that has two sickle-shaped alleles will have it. One allele in the person will produce both normal and sickle-shaped cells, but if they have two, then they will actually have sickle cell. These people will not usually have symptoms of the disease if they are a carrier for it. If they have one normal blood cell and one sickle-shaped, then they do not have the condition, they're just a carrier for it. And here is a little short video to share a little bit about sickle cell disease.
Imagine for a minute that your blood cells are shaped like sickles, sort of like that thing that the image of death carries. Ouch, right? But what exactly causes our friendly little red blood cells to turn against us? Sickle cell anemia is a blood disorder, where instead of supple, soft, frisbee red blood cells that live for 120 days, your body forms stiff, pointy, sickle-shaped cells that only live for 10 to 20 days. RBCs need to be soft and pliable to squeeze through your blood vessels safely and efficiently. So when they're pointy, they can get stuck in there. When this happens in the chest, abdomen, or joints, it can cause pain. If they get stuck in the hands or feet, you can get swelling. And of course, if they get stuck in vital organs, they can cause infections, or if they get caught in the eye, vision problems. And if that wasn't bad enough, the brittle cells can break apart, delaying oxygen delivery and causing fatigue. This all sounds terrible. It was first described in 1910 in a dental student named Walter Clement Noel, who went to a doctor in Chicago complaining of pain. But this student wasn't from Chicago, he was from Grenada. Sickle cell anemia predominantly affects approximately 1 in 400 African American births. It was a disease known in Africa for about 5,000 years, but it had never been described in Western medicine before about 100 years ago. The doctor in Chicago, whose name was James B. Herrick, was the first to describe it in a paper, and over the next century, many doctors have attempted to uncover just how this debilitating disorder works and why it mainly affects those of African descent. In the 1930s, a DC-based doctor named William Cardozo was one of the first black doctors to conduct research into this disease, and he did so with a grant from Alpha Phi Alpha, the first black fraternal organization. Cardozo felt that research into sickle cell anemia had, quote, reached an impasse, and that no one had yet found the cause of this horrible disease. If someone could provide a new stimulus to get the research going, he wrote, maybe we could discover more. His research, published in 1937, helped medicine realize that sickle cell anemia was inherited. Thanks to his research, we now know that sickle cell anemia came from us, and he helped explain why it mainly affected people of African descent, which is huge. While he was working on that, other doctors started to realize that this disease was based on oxygen content in the blood. In fact, Quebecois researchers in 1930 Montreal took a 7-year-old black girl and restricted blood flow to her finger with a rubber band. This probably wouldn't pass an ethics board today. In doing so, they found, though, that sickle cells formed in the low oxygen environment of her fingertip. They learned that with a bit of hypoxia, or lack of oxygen, the normal cells could collapse into all manner of weird and pointy shapes, nearly instantly returning to normal when exposed to air. Their methods were questionable, to say the least, but the results did shape future research. In the mid-20th century, doctors discovered that a single amino acid was responsible for the hemoglobin on the red blood cells that caused the sickling. But now that we understand the disorder enough to try and solve it, unfortunately, we're at another moment when we may need more new stimulus, like Cardozo said. According to a clinical investigation from 2007, there are many possible treatments for this disease, including a bone marrow transplant, but there is still no cure. One option is medicine that helps fetuses develop more hemoglobin, but it can make the disease worse. Maybe in the future we could get genetic manipulation of the systems that help our bodies create blood using genome engineering or gene therapy. But for now, sickle cell anemia is just out there, a life-threatening thorn in many people's sides. Cardozo was one of many doctors of many races in the hunt for causes of sickle cell anemia. He's notable because in the 1930s, doctors that looked like him were often not welcome in the halls of medicine. That he was able to make a discovery for a disorder that affected so many people that also looked like him is a pretty big deal. So we're happy to recognize the part he played in this story for Black History Month. For more on red blood, watch Jules' video about what bone marrow actually does here. Hint, it is very important. And please subscribe for more.